Hey there, Pastor Marc here. It's our prayer that this message would encourage and equip you in your relationship with Jesus. We're able to provide this content due to the joyful generosity of our financial partners. And if you'd be willing to join that tribe and help get some sermons like this around the world, you can donate at harvestbaptist.info/give. God bless. So go to the book of Jude, and we're going to cover verses 8, 9, and 10 this morning as we keep working through this book of the Bible, verse by verse. I was thinking, as I was studying and preparing, my mind was brought back to 9/11 as I prepared the sermon. And most of you in the room, not all, but most of you in the room are old enough to remember the events that took place on 9/11. And of course, all of the aftermath that happened after that. To say that there were ripple effects is an understatement. We had the Department of Homeland Security that became a thing shortly thereafter. You had to start going through TSA and security at the airport and had to add some extra time to your travel. Terrorism was in seemingly every TV show, every movie plot. Like if there was any sort of drama, then it seemed like there was a terrorist inserted into it for about a decade or so. Of course, the war on terror began in earnest, and a lot of this was new. Terrorism wasn't new, but it was new to us in that it came to our shores. War for our country wasn't new, but it was definitely in a new way, because generally when you go to war, you know who you're fighting. They have their uniform, you have your uniform, they have their flag, you have your flag, there are clear boundary lines. But the war on terror, and even today, what we face as a global world with terrorism is very different, because they don't wear uniforms. They act like you. They try to fit in. They try to blend in. They try to be chameleons. And their goal is to sneak attack. It's when you don't see it coming, to actually detonate the bomb or fly the plane into the building or whatever it may be. And that's altogether different when you have those who are pretenders with malicious intentions. That takes a different strategy. It takes a different mindset. You need like Jack Bauers of the world to be able to identify and root out those people. I'm not sure how many of you got into the 24 series back in the day, but like you need that sort of mentality. And Jude is writing to the church to basically say that there's spiritual terrorists among you. They are pretenders, they are trying to fit in, they're trying to act as though they're on Team Jesus, but they're not. They have malicious intentions, and Jude is trying to call forth some spiritual Jack Bauers to be able to identify and root out who these pretenders actually are. And he has language for this, and really we have language for this. The religious language would not be really spiritual terrorists, or the religious language would be apostasy, or those who have become apostate, those who have actually abandoned, or perhaps they never had it in the first place, really what Christianity is, but yet they're still pretending as though they belong and that they're on the team. And Jude's goal over verses 8 and 9 and 10 is to paint a bit of a portrait of what apostasy would look like, so that we can be well served in trying to identify and root out those who actually would do harm to the cause of Christ under the banner of Christ. So let us read verses 8, 9, and 10 together. This is a continuation of what he's already said, and really an elaboration of what he's already said. He says in verse number 8, that likewise also these filthy dreamers defile the flesh. They despise dominion. They speak evil of dignities. Yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses. He durst not or dared not bring against him a railing accusation, but he said, the Lord rebuke thee. But these speak evil of those things which they know not, but what they know naturally as brute beasts, in those things they corrupt themselves. Now, what is Jude describing here? Jude is describing first a group of people that are immoral. When he says in verse number 8, these filthy dreamers defile the flesh, which was the topic of our sermon last week, he is talking about those who are immoral. We know this because he connects it to verse number 7, which was all about Sodom and Gomorrah and the immorality that possessed those people. And you see biblically that God does not teach us to repress sex, but to revere sex. That is what God calls us to. And in a culture that treats sex like a disposable paper plate that is replaceable, disposable, and valuable, God says no, sex is like fine china. God does not have a lower view of sexuality. He has a higher view of sexuality, and he calls us as his people to steward that well. If that is not crystal clear, go back and listen to last week's sermon, and there'll be a lot of clarity around that. But he identifies the people and paints the portrait as those who are immoral, meaning they want to defile their bodies, but also those who are independent, and they deny the lordship of Jesus. This is the next phrase that he uses in verse number 8, that they, quote, despise dominion. When we talk about dominion, we're talking about authority. Authority can come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, but certainly this would start with the authority of Jesus. This is something that in verse number 4 of Jude, he said that they actually did in fact deny the lordship of Jesus, and that these people are allergic to authority. There are lots of allergies that you or I could have nowadays. I have to take allergy medication right now. If I do not take my allergy pill first thing in the morning throughout the back part of May and the first part of June, I am miserable. I'm utterly miserable. I need that right now. There are allergies. There's peanut allergies, and there's gluten allergies, and there's lactose intolerance allergies, and these things that, in my estimation, are like more pronounced than they used to be. Maybe my head was in the sand when I was a kid and I just didn't know, but I swear I didn't know anybody with a peanut allergy or a gluten allergy. I knew one of my friends, Steven, put apple juice on a cereal, and I discovered why he did that, because he was lactose intolerant. So I knew one person with an allergy. But I didn't know very many. And why does it at least seem to me that there's more now than others? I'm not even going to speculate a guess. There's lots of speculation on that, and I'll leave that to scientists and to doctors, and they can figure it out. But it seems as though allergies are more widespread or common now. And those that are allergic to authority have become far more widespread or common now than it used to be. It's always been. This is an allergy that's like as old as the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve are saying, well, we could be like God if we eat this fruit, and we could not really be subject to him, but could be on the same level as him. Like, this is as old as humanity. But if you pay attention at all, you would notice that our culture is getting worse with having authority, any authority in their life at all. If you are an employer, or perhaps you are a boss in your position at work and you have those who report to you, and if you've started to assume those that are maybe in their 20s or their 30s that are reporting to you, you probably will have noticed that they struggle with authority and that they struggle with feedback far more than those who are maybe a generation or two ahead of them, because it's something that they haven't grown up with. Lots of authority in the home. This really trickles back to parents who decided to be their friends and just kind of play easy and keep just nice good soil in the home, and everything's a good temperament and happy and joyful, and then my kids will just blossom into the fruitful people they need to be. It roots back in some of that. It roots back in some of the philosophies that have possessed our day, but you see it manifest in people's behavior. If you're a teacher, it doesn't take you very long to figure out my third graders who are coming into my class are different than my third graders 20 years ago, especially when it relates to authority, and that many of them, they don't know how to obey. They don't know how to have an authority figure tell them no and be able to respond to that in a way that is obedient. Like, they would do it, and they would do it right away, and they would do it without a meltdown. Like, many kids just don't know this. If you're a grandparent, you may have picked up on this on your grandchildren, that perhaps that 4-year-old runs the house and they don't seem to obey you or their parents or anybody else, and there's no real authority in their life. Coaches see this. I feel bad for most of our sports coaches nowadays because you coaching, actually, and I'm not talking about being a rage monster. We're not talking about Bobby Knight here, but we're talking about just actually correcting and instructing. But parents oftentimes want you to coddle their children more than they want you to coach their children. All of it speaks to this idea that I don't really want someone authoritatively telling me what to do and calling the shots in my life. This is all over the place in our culture, and many people just recoil at the idea of being under authority. We want our independence, we want our autonomy, we want to do it our way, we want to follow our heart, we want to do what we think is right, and we don't want authority, and that authority includes Jesus. And Jude says there are people who do not want authority, but they especially don't want the authority of Jesus in their life. They want Jesus as a mascot, but they don't want Jesus as a master. They'll be a fan of Jesus, but they won't be a follower of Jesus. They will not say, Jesus, you can call the shots. This shows up in spiritual language like, well, I follow Jesus, but I'm not really big into church. Or I'm spiritual, but I'm not really religious. Or, some of the red letter stuff that Jesus has is good, but I don't know about the rest of it. And Jesus actually dealt with this with those who said that they followed him, even in the first century, when he looked at an audience at one point in time in Luke chapter number 6 and said, why do you call me Lord and you do not the things which I say? Jesus calls it what it is. How are you possibly saying that I'm your Lord and you won't obey me? That's not how lordship works. You actually have to do what I say. You have to keep my commandments. This is part of the gig. Submission is part of Christianity, not just part of Christianity, but part and parcel with Christianity. It's fundamental to our relationship with Jesus that we would actually say, Jesus, you're in control, and I'm not going to dethrone you and deify myself. I'm going to allow you to call the shots. And Jesus says, if you won't do that, he goes so far as to call you a fool. He says at the end of his most famous sermon, the most famous sermon ever preached, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter number 7. He gets to the end of it and he says, if you hear what I say, but you won't do it, you are like a fool that builds your house on sand, and your house will collapse. But if you hear what I say and not just somehow give some sort of mental assent or verbal credence to what I say, but you do it, then you're like a wise man who builds his house on a rock, and your life will hold firm. Jesus knew there would be people who would say, I'm on your team, I hear what you say, I want to listen to you, but they didn't want to do it. Who wanted their independence, they didn't want his lordship. And you have to be aware of those who overtly want independence and will not come under the authority of Jesus. But you also have to be aware of those who covertly will try to act as though they're on the team. And this is really what Jude has in mind. And they are these little spiritual terrorists that are pretending, but they are not on Team Jesus. If you're like, what would that look like? I want to play you a video clip. I want to show you what this would look like. This is a video clip. And to be clear, whether someone truly is saved or not is above my pay grade. That is a God job to figure that out. But we are to discern, and we are to actually look and try to say, does that line up with what Jesus said or not? And this is a clip of a former Christian comedian, grew up in church, as well as Rainn Wilson, who's most well known for being Dwight Schrute on The Office. But it's them talking about their spirituality and why they would call themselves Christians. This is 60 seconds maybe, but listen to this.
You're a man of faith.
I am. And even though I'm a Baha'i, I consider myself a Christian because my love of Jesus, the red letter Bible, like what Jesus taught, what he said, what he did, being a little different than what rose up hundreds and hundreds of years after his life.
For sure.
In that sense, I consider myself a Christian in the beauty of the teachings and the metaphors and the mythology.
And I would agree with you on
of
that.
the Bible.
So if we're talking about subscription to the teachings of Jesus, then I'm a Christian.
Okay.
But because being a Christian meant something very specific to us, and what we considered a Christian was someone who had specific faith in the person of Jesus as the offering for our sins, right? Mm-hmm. God in the flesh who sacrificed himself so that we could have a reconciled relationship with God.
Yeah.
Like that's what a Christian was. And I think that in many ways, it's still kind of what a Christian is to most people. And because that's what it kind of communicates, I say, I agree with the teachings of Jesus. But the person of Jesus, the nature of Jesus, and like what is fiction, what's fact, I'm not really that concerned with what's fact and what's fiction.
I love Jesus. That's what he said. I subscribe to the teachings of Jesus. In that sense, I consider myself a Christian. And you might think, well, great, we got some Christian people. Wrong. You can't say, I love the teachings of Jesus, and then completely renounce what Jesus taught. Jesus didn't just teach, love your neighbor, turn the other cheek, be humble. He also taught, I am God in the flesh. I am the only way to the Father. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Like, let's pretend that what they said was fair, and we're going to ignore all of the Bible, and we're just going to take the red letter. Just the red letters, Jesus said, I'm God. Just the red letters, Jesus said, I'm going to die for sins. I'm going to raise from the dead. Just the red letters tell us that. So you cannot in one breath say, I subscribe to the teachings of Jesus. But who knows if it's fact or fiction? Did he really raise for the dead? Are we really going to believe that he died as atonement for our sins and believe on him? I know some people used to think that's what a Christian was. Sometimes people still think that's what it is. That's trash. Those are people who are pretending as though they love Jesus and are on Team Jesus, but if you ask them point blank, do you believe that Jesus is the only way to the Father? No. Well, that's what he said. So either he's a liar or he's telling the truth. Either you believe him or you don't. Those are people who are a la carting their spiritual life and are saying, I want what Jesus taught there, and I want what Jesus taught there, and I want what Jesus taught there, but I'm going to take all the rest of it, I'm going to chuck it out the window, and then I'm going to pretend like I'm a Christian. That's not Christianity. And Jude says, you got to be aware of that stuff. You scroll through your Instagram or your YouTube shorts or whatever it is, and you come across that, and half of you would think, well, I guess these are Christians, and we should get Rainn Wilson here for a men's conference, and we should have him talk about Jesus. No. That's what Jude's talking about. People that are pretending as though they really are on the team when they're not on the team. Now, I don't know when that was videoed. Maybe something has changed. I cannot report on somebody else's soul, but I can tell you that that's not accurate. It's not accurate. And Jude says you want to be aware of people who want Jesus, they talk spiritual, they say they love Jesus, but they don't want his authority. They want to be independent. They want to do what they want to do. They want to believe what they want to believe. They want it to all revolve around them, and they are dethroning Jesus. They are deifying themselves, and that's not okay. So part of a false teacher is someone who they're allergic to authority. They can't take it. They can't take it from Jesus. They can't take it from parents. They can't take it from a boss. They can't take it from a police officer. They can't take it. They don't want authority. The other part of a false teacher is this next phrase in verse number 8, where he says, quote, they speak evil of dignities. Now, if Jude has not stepped on your toes yet, 8 verses in, brace yourself. He's about to. And mine too. 90% of us, Jude's going to get us right here. They speak evil of dignities, meaning they're irreverent. They disrespect what should be sacred. They mock what they should revere. They blaspheme what is holy. Now listen to me on this. Our words matter. Death and life is in the power of the tongue. Jesus says, and this is a haunting statement to tell you the truth, thank God for his grace and mercy and forgiveness that he can cover a lot of sin here. But Jesus says, every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give an account thereof in the day of judgment. That you're going to give an account for everything that you do and everything that you say. Every dishonoring word, every misplaced word, every unkind word, every untrue word, everything that you say, God knows. And you're going to give an account for that. And there's lots of things that we should do with our words. But what he's getting at here is that there are authority figures that God has placed in lives and in homes and in societies, and there's supposed to be a reverence that is due them, and you do not dismiss that out of hand or run them down or trash them. You speak to them in an honorable, revering way. And not just speak, you type your stuff on social media in an honoring and revering way. You say, well, who would this apply to? Well, let's start at the top. God. Let's start there. Finish this sentence. It's actually a prayer. You're probably going to know it. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed. Very good. What's that about? The opening line to the Our Father. Our Father, which art in heaven. Father, close, intimacy, relationship. Heaven, you're in heaven, majesty, glory. Hallowed be your name. Now, hallowed is not a word that we would use very often unless you moonlight as like a tour guide for an old battlefield or something and talk about hallowed ground. This isn't a word you'd use very often, but it means revered, sacred, holy, set apart. And it's not a statement. It's not your name is holy, although God's name is. It is God, may your name be made holy. It is a petition. It's a request. God, I want your name to be revered in my life, in my family, in my church, in my community, in our country, in our world. I want your name to be revered. Now, it doesn't take you very long to figure out that you're swimming upstream when you're praying that prayer. Because God's name is at best background noise and at worst a punchline to a whole lot of people. But they don't revere his name, but you have this disposition towards the name of God and the nature of God and the character of God of like, God, I want to treat you with reverence and respect, and I want other people to treat you with reverence and respect. I don't want them to use the name of Jesus as a curse word. I don't want them to use your name flippantly. I don't want them to claim your name and not really be on your team. I want there to be reverence and honor coming to your name that's due your name. Like that's fundamental for a Christian. But God has entrusted certain people in positions with authority, and he demands of Christians that we revere those positions even if they do not reflect God, because none of us, humanly speaking, are going to reflect God perfectly. Some better than others, but there's reverence and respect that God calls us to even with our words. So, for example, children are to not only obey their parents, but they are to honor their parents. And generally speaking, if children do not obey or honor their parents, it stems back to the parents, and the parents probably did a poor job teaching them. Not always, but the majority of the time, that's the case. That children are even, we're not talking about just 7 and 8. We're talking about 17 and 18. We're talking about 27 and 28. The children are not to be irreverent to their parents. That's not your old man. That's your father or your dad. That's not the old lady of the house. You don't disrespect mom and dad. If you're a dad and a husband, okay? You're a husband and you have a kid, raise your hand for me. Let me survey the room here, okay? Keep them up. Lock those elbows, loud and proud, all right? All right, I got you, okay? I'm talking to you. It's your job to teach your children to respect their mom. Mom should do it too when you're not there, and they should get in trouble if they disrespect her, but it's your job. Tell your kids, do not disrespect my wife. You don't disrespect my wife. My friends don't. My own mother does not. My coworkers don't. And you certainly are not going to either at 7 years old. You're not going to disrespect your mother. That should be a no-fly zone. There should be a consequence with teeth if they do. You have to teach your children respect. You have to teach children respect even for each other, but especially up to a parental unit. There's supposed to be reverence there. Parents, teach your children to revere authority. Do not sit at the dinner table or drive down the road and trash the coach and the teacher and the pastor and the community leader and the person on the township board and grandma and the uncle and everyone else. You're teaching your children to be disrespectful to authority. Don't do that. Have a certain amount of reverence. I'm not saying you agree with everyone on everything. I'm not saying you never call a spade and say that was wrong. But I am saying you can do it with a certain amount of authority and reverence in a way that teaches your children reverence. You're told, as unpopular as this is for our culture, in Ephesians 5, verse number 33, if you don't believe me, you can go read it and weep, that husbands are to love their wives. They're supposed to sacrifice for their wives. They're supposed to give of themselves for their wives, just as Jesus gave himself for the church. And husbands have a tall order on what it means to actually love your wives. But wives are told to, quote, reverence your husbands. That there is a fundamental respect game being played from the wife to the husband that is different. This doesn't mean that a husband gets to disrespect his wife. It doesn't mean that. But it does mean that there is a fundamental respect that he is going to crave and need that she needs to give if the marriage is to operate properly. If there is a husband who feels disrespected, disregarded, resented, then that marriage will not be healthy. It will not. Every wife in the room would be in one of two boats. Either the, my husband's great, I want to respect him, I do respect him, or the, he's not so hot, and I don't really want to respect him. And by hot, I don't mean physically attractive. I mean, he's not doing a good job. If you're in the boat where, like, I have so much respect for him in so many ways, then communicate it. Don't just feel it, think it. In the same way that you don't want him to say, well, I told you I loved you on the day that I married you. That should have been good enough. You know, you want him to communicate it. You want him to show it. Then you should communicate it and show it. Some of you are over here, though, where you're like, well, I don't know that he's doing such a great job. Like, I really feel like he could get his act together. I really feel like I'm pulling more weight. I really feel like he's lazy sometimes. I feel like I know more than him spiritually, and that I have to teach him spiritually. Listen to me. You are not going to get what you desire from your husband by berating him and by mocking him and by nagging him. It's not going to work. Pick the things that he's doing well. I'm not saying never talk about anything that he's doing wrong, but pick the things that he's doing well, and guess what? You'll get what you praise. You'll get more of what you praise. When you find the things that you can show respect for and you start to show respect for those things, it will have a positive impact on the marriage. I can all but guarantee it. There's a certain amount of respect that has to come into the home, and there is this idea that, hey, I'm going to expect you to provide for me. I'm going to expect you to protect me. And maybe some of you ladies are like, no, if there's a bear, I'll fight the bear, and you can run, husband. But I bet most of you aren't. I'm going to expect you, if I hear a noise downstairs, you get the bat and you go down, or the gun. We're in Pennsylvania. We got guns, not bats. I was in California where they were so tough to come by. You get the gun and you go downstairs. I expect you to provide for me. I expect you to protect for me. And you should have those high expectations, but have reverence, have respect. We're told that government officials are supposed to have respect. This is where I'm really going to get you. Well, I'm not, God is, but 1 Peter tells us, and this is not a unique verse to 1 Peter, this is all over the place, that we submit ourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake. Let's just talk about that for a minute. Remember when Jesus paid taxes? He paid temple taxes. It was this man-made thing that they were doing, that they were charging taxes. And his crew looked at him and were like, you're God. Like, you're not going to pay tax to the temple. Like, the temple's for you. Like, you don't owe tax. And it was something they had put in place. And what did he do? He paid the tax. He told them to give to Caesar that which is Caesar's. Now, do we like to pay our taxes? Do we often complain about it? Probably. But if that is not unbiblical, then you roll with it. And if you don't like it, move to Canada or somewhere else or whatever it is, you know? There are ordinances that are not against God. They're not our preferences. They're not fun. But you still are supposed to follow them if they're not overtly against God. I'm not going to poll the audience on who is willing to wear a mask or not wear a mask, but let's insert that as an example. Well, that was 5 years ago. I know it was 5 years ago. You would have left the church if I told you this 5 years ago. I understand we're in a unique spot where one county didn't have mask mandates and they're saying, no, we're not going to follow those, and the other county did, and do we follow the federal, the county? I understand that was confusing. But there were a lot of situations where Christians just thumbed their nose. I'm not even saying masks are a good idea or a good thing. I'm not claiming that I love masks. But have mercy. There were so many Christians who fought tooth and nail over something that's like so not biblical and are unwilling to just go with an ordinance or something. And I'm not saying be a sheep. I'm not saying never have an opinion. But when a law becomes a law or something becomes an effect, like at a certain point you have to get over it. That you say, I don't like that. That's going to step on my freedoms. I don't know that God promised you unlimited freedoms everywhere in all of your life. I don't know if you know this, but the Constitution isn't in heaven enshrined. I have a First Amendment right. I'll run down whoever I want to. I don't know that God subscribes to your First Amendment right. I'm all for freedom of speech, but I don't know that God is so free speech that he allows us to belittle dignitaries and talk evil about presidents and senators or whoever as though there's no respect due them. Disagree, sure, but do it with some respect. In the same way that those who represent the government, police officers deserve respect, military personnel deserve respect. I am thankful that the military personnel seems to be fine right now. Back in the Vietnam days, it wasn't. The police officer having respect is not as in vogue anymore, but they deserve respect. City council members, senators, congressmen, mayors, judges. You can actually get a good picture of this if you think about a judge. Because none of you, unless you're just blatantly foolish, are going to walk into a courtroom and spout off and mouth off and tell that judge whatever you want, whenever you want. You are going to address the judge as your honor. You are going to bide your tongue and you're going to choose your words carefully because you understand the nature of what's happening in that courtroom and the position that that judge has, and that that judge in some ways holds your life in their hands. So there's some reverence that comes their way. It doesn't mean you agree with the judge. It doesn't mean you don't argue your case if you're a defendant. It doesn't mean that you just go along with whatever. That's not what it means, but it means that there is a fundamental level of respect. And Christians are called to be these people. And I fear that this has just been lost completely, whether it be to irreverence in the name of humor, and we just want to laugh at whatever meme or whatever stand-up comedian who's completely irreverent, or we just don't want authority in our lives. Like so many people have lost this, the idea that you don't speak evil of dignities. Continuing in 1 Peter, he said, not just submit yourselves to every ordinance, whether it be to king as supreme or unto governors, meaning there are layers of government. There are those that are very high up, there are those that are lower down, but they both have their role to play. As unto them that are sent by him, God, for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of them that do well. Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. You say, well, they must have had a great king. It's the first century. You have the Caesars who hated Christians, who persecuted, who killed Christians. If you think you have a bad leader, you haven't seen anything compared to what they had. But there was still this idea that there's honor due certain people. At the risk of sounding self-serving, this is the case for pastors. You're told that pastors are due honor, and those that rule well are worthy of double honor. That there's actually a respect that is due those who have a position of leadership, including a pastorship. I was thinking as I thought through the sermon, I had two big thoughts. One was in all the ways that I do a poor job of this, frankly. It was very convicting. But then second was like, where did this come from? Because there was, for me and my brothers growing up, just a baseline of respecting our teachers and our coaches and the pastor at the church or the police officer. Like that was just kind of part of the culture of our home. And I began to trace it back to a Bible story that my dad told us over and over that I had not thought about for 20 years. In 2 Kings chapter 2, there's this little 3-verse Bible story about Elisha. Elisha has just been handed the mantle from Elijah, and he's going to Bethel. And as he's traveling on his way to Bethel, he's going up. There are these kids in the community, and we don't know if they're like 10 years old or 15 years old, it doesn't say. But these kids in the community come out and they start to mock him. And specifically, they start to make fun of his bald head. And they start to say, "Get out of here, baldy." The words they use is "Go up, thou bald head," is what it says. But they're, you don't belong here. Get on your way, you bald man. And they begin to mock him and make fun of him. And anyone who is struggling with male balding pattern can relate to how Elisha might have felt, that he wasn't loving that. I can relate with that. Recently I've been looking in the mirror and I'm like, my forehead has grown. Like, do I have a tumor? No, my hairline is receding. My forehead's not growing. I'm losing the battle. And FYI, I'm shaving my head this week. I've been debating for a year. I'm doing it, okay? And you think I'm joking. I'm not. When you see me next week, well, thank you. Apparently my hair's terrible. Don't ask me if I have chemo treatments. Don't ask me if I have a midlife crisis. We're going to see how it looks. We're going to shave it off. We're going to give it a go. I'm really going to do it. I can relate with Elisha. That's the point. The point was not male balding pattern. They were making fun of him for it. And the text says that God sends mama bears and they ate the kids. Like literally, that's what it says. And my dad would tell us the story, and he would tell us, like, you better not be disrespectful to the wrong person. God will kill you. Like, that was the moral of the story, which actually is the moral of the story in 2 Kings. And we had this even saying that, like, God doesn't call them mama bears. In the text, they're called she-bears. And we would say something as brothers and be like, "Baby she-bear around here," and we'd joke about it, but we had this story that communicated although it was a very in-your-face story, a very blunt story, it communicated the idea of like, you don't be disrespectful to prophets and to preachers and to people that have authority. You don't do that. God has always believed that, and he tells Christians that our speech is supposed to be something different. Sheep, no. People who just go with the flow and do everything that we're told, no. I'm a dad to a daughter. I would never tell my daughter, do everything a male authority figure tells you to do. That'd be poor advice. But I would tell her that if that person's a teacher or a coach or a pastor or on the township board or the president, that we're not going to be out of bounds and out of control with our speech about them. It was a conversation we just had in our home with our 11-year-old this week when he was running down one of his teachers. And we told him, like, you don't have to, and Ms. Fabic, it wasn't you. You're his primary teacher, it wasn't you. Hey, you can disagree, you cannot like, you can communicate that to us, we'll talk about it, but we're not talking that way about your teacher. We're not doing that. That's not okay. This is something that is true of Christians. Now, some of you are thinking, but you don't know how bad my husband is. You don't know how bad my mom is. She is the worst. She's always in my business. She's so passive aggressive. She's always gaslighting me. You don't know how bad our president is. And sometimes you have a president who doesn't even follow these rules, but it doesn't excuse you from the rules. Well, you don't know how bad. Here would be my question. Are they as bad as the devil? You say that's a trick question. It's not a trick question. It's a contextual question because verse number 9 is going to talk about this. Read verse number 9. Michael, the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed or argued about the body of Moses. Yet he didn't dare bring against the devil a railing accusation or begin to slander him, but said, "The Lord rebuke thee." Now let's break this down. This is one of the reasons people avoid the book of Jude, because you get to verses like this and you're like, what is going on? Michael is the archangel, meaning Michael is the 5-star general. That's what archangel means. He is the strongest, most powerful, leader of the warriors in the army. And angels have lots of different jobs. They're not all created equal. God didn't cookie cut the angels. They have lots of different jobs. One of them is angels are oftentimes warriors. Michael is the leader of those angelic warriors. It's very possible that Michael is the baddest, toughest, fiercest creature that God has ever made. Like, period. If you think Dana White and the UFC have found some bad people and some people that can do some damage, think again. Michael's that dude. And we're told that Michael got into an argument about the body of Moses. If you're like, I don't remember that Sunday school story, it's because it's not in the Bible, okay? There's this story in the Bible of Moses who is not permitted to go into the promised land, and God takes him up to Mount Nebo, and God kills him, and then it says God buries him. And you're like, how did God do that? We don't know exactly, but there is Jewish tradition. If you want to Google it, you can actually find this. You can read it. It's dubbed now. It's titled The Assumption of Moses. But there was Jewish tradition that God sent Michael to do the burial of Moses. And when Michael went to bury Moses and give him an honorable and a proper, respectful, reverent burial, that the devil came and said, you can't give him an honorable burial because he killed somebody. He's a murderer. 80 years ago, he killed an Egyptian. And the story, whether the story is true or not, I don't know. We'll have to ask God one day. But the story is that Michael and the devil started arguing with each other. But Michael would not slander the devil. And he said, I'm putting in God's hands to rebuke you. Whether the story is true or not doesn't matter. The point that Jude is making is what matters, and it's true. And he talks about authority and reverence in one story. It's a beautiful, beautiful illusion. What he's saying is you have the most powerful creature ever made, who even he doesn't dare step across the boundary where his authority begins and ends. Even Michael the archangel knows where the authority ends and says it's God's job to rebuke you, and I'm not going to assume that authority. And even Michael the archangel, who is facing the devil, if anyone should be slandered and criticized and point your finger and run them down, it should be the devil. And even Michael understood, I'm not going to slander you. I'm going to put this in God's hands. It's his way of communicating. If this is a story that we know and perhaps even think is true, if he's going to those links, then what should we do? It's his way of saying, you don't have a hall pass. You don't get to claim your own authority. You don't get to be irreverent to whoever you think is bad. It's his way of clearly communicating, there is no exception to this. You can't just go be independent and irreverent whenever you want. You can't do it. That's not Christian. And if someone is that way, mark them and look out for them. You want to beware of them. You want to avoid them because that's not Jesus. Verse number 10, but these speak evil of those things which they know not, but what they know naturally as brute beasts, in those things they corrupt themselves. Now this is the last one we're going to untangle, and there's a little bit here. They speak evil of things they don't know. He's saying that they pretend as though they know spiritual stuff, God and his will and the scriptures and the Holy Spirit. But when they talk about that, they don't know anything, and they're actually speaking evil of God and the scriptures and the Holy Spirit and his will. This would show up in things like, well, God gave me peace about sleeping with my boyfriend because we're going to get married one day anyway. You're talking about the peace of God as though you know what the peace of God is, but what you just said makes it very clear that not only you don't know about the peace of God, you also are now talking evil about the peace of God as though God had something to do with the immorality, right? Well, I prayed about it, and the Holy Spirit told me that I should fill in the blank, whatever is against God and his word. You've just talked about something you don't actually know about, and you've made it evil because you're using God and spirituality as a cover for whatever you want to do. He says, these are those people. Really, though, what they're doing is what they know naturally as brute beasts. They're just following their animalistic instincts. They're just doing whatever comes natural to them, what is fleshly for them, and in doing so, they corrupt themselves. They're using God as a cover. They don't know anything about it. They're speaking evil of God in the process. All they're actually doing is wanting to find a spiritual loophole for why they can go sin and do whatever they want. But when they do that, they're hurting themselves. They're corrupting themselves. Some would even translate that, they're damning themselves. He's communicating what we should know to be true as Christians, that Satan himself disguises himself as an angel of light. That's what the scriptures say. That wolves come in sheep's clothing. That they pretend as though they're on the team, but they're really not. Now here's the takeaway, and I'm done really. When I read this text, there are certain questions that start to pop into my head. Not just to help me identify them and where they're wrong, but to really begin to identify myself and where these things that would be true of a false teacher would maybe affix to my own life. I think a fair question to ask would be, am I tolerating sin in the name of grace? Let's not pretend like there isn't grace for sin. There is grace for sin. Thank God for that. But let's not tolerate sin just because there's grace. That's not Christian. Am I truly submitting to Jesus, or am I just borrowing his name? Do I treat holy things with reverence, or do I treat them with indifference? Who drives my choices? Does my flesh drive my choices, or does the Holy Spirit drive my choices? Jude is willing to say that there are slick gospel knockoffs. And if you pay attention to them, they will defile the flesh, they will deny the Lord, and they will disrespect that which is sacred. And his call to action for us is not only to identify that, but his call to action for us is to do the opposite. That we would live in purity, that we would submit to Jesus, and that we would walk with reverent words. I'm going to repeat that because this is the end. That we would live in purity, that we would submit to Jesus, and that we would walk with reverent words. May that be true of us.